I knocked on my daughter-in-law's front door dressed like a woman the world forgets. Thrift store blouse, hair pinned back, old flats that have known rain. I wanted to see what kind of love could look me in the eye without a label on it. The first look I received told me more than an hour of polite chatter ever could. It said I was less. It said I was a burden. Here is the turn you do not expect. I am not poor, and I did not come for their approval. I came for the truth. My name is Judith Reynolds. I am 70, born in Richmond, Virginia, and I live quietly now in a small brick townhouse in Arlington. I am the kind of woman who keeps her receipts in tidy envelopes and her memories tucked in the dryer's soft hum. That dryer once spun late into the night, paid for with coins and grit, while my son slept in the next room, and I told myself that hard work could build a bridge over any river. Years passed. The bridge held. I became regional director of operations for a multinational company, overseeing teams across 5 countries, earning $65,000 each month, and still I chose a modest life. I learned early that dignity walks softer than wealth and stands taller than noise. My son, David, does not know the full ledger of my life. He knows hand-me-down casseroles, second-hand books, and a mother who showed up no matter what, even when I felt like an ATM mother pressed for withdrawals of time and patience. He knows I do not flaunt anything. Somewhere along the way, that quiet became a mask in his eyes. He mistook restraint for lack. Ungrateful children do not begin ungrateful. They learn from the world where value is a number and respect is reserved for those who display it. The invitation came on a Friday afternoon. David called, voice bright, telling me that his wife's parents wanted to host a formal dinner. The Petersons, old money suburb, high ceilings, lawns trimmed like they are judging you. He said, "Mom, can you keep it simple? They think you pick up cleaning gigs sometimes. It will be less awkward if you stick to that." Less awkward. I stood at my kitchen counter, hand on the cool edge, and looked at the little clay dish where I keep my keys. A dish my son made in middle school, crooked and perfect. The word awkward took on a heavier shape. I felt the insult travel through me like a slow flame. It did not scorch, not right away. It warmed memory after memory. The morning I signed his tuition check with hands that still smelled of bleach. The winter I carried groceries up 3 floors in snow so he would not skip dinner. The day I taught him that a person's worth cannot be measured by shoes or cars, only by how they carry themselves when no one is watching. And here he was, asking me to erase myself to make wealthy strangers comfortable. Silent abuse is not always a shout. Sometimes it is a gentle request that strips your name and fits you into a smaller coat. I said yes. Then I set a boundary with myself that felt like a line carved into oak. I would play along, but only to reveal what needed revealing. Not to humiliate, not to gloat, not to seek revenge. To show the difference between perceived value and real value. To expose the family betrayal that happens when pride bows to arrogance. I prepared the disguise with a care I usually reserve for board reviews and team audits. A faded blouse, a canvas tote with a spray bottle, and a soft cloth tucked inside. Hair pulled back to show the years on my face. Freedom is not the absence of judgment. Freedom is walking into judgment with your own definition of yourself already settled. I looked in the mirror and saw my mother's hands, the ones that taught me to scrub and to pray, to save, and to start over when life cracked. Recomeço is tied to inner strength. I smiled at that woman in the glass and promised her I would not let anyone decide her worth tonight. When I arrived at the Peterson home, the evening light threw a pale ribbon across their stone walkway. The front door opened before I knocked twice. My daughter-in-law smiled uncertainly, a smile that tried to bridge 2 worlds. Behind her, the room gleamed. Fresh flowers, framed diplomas, the scent of lemon polish sharper than the flowers. And then came the look, not from my daughter-in-law, from her mother. A quick scan from head to toe, a flicker of disdain softened by etiquette. I knew it well. I have seen it in conference rooms when people assumed the quiet woman was the assistant. I have seen it on sales floors where staff judge customers by shoes. That look is a practiced instrument. In that first moment, I learned everything I needed to know, and still I stepped inside with respect. Boundaries do not require rudeness. They require clarity. I had come to put an end to a story that was growing crooked. Tonight would not be about money. Tonight would be about justice measured in tone and in truth. Tonight would be about courage and self-care, about how a woman protects her dignity without losing her grace. Respect is the table I build, and if others cannot sit there, I do not lower it. I simply stop serving. I took a breath and crossed the threshold, carrying my quiet like a lantern. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. The air inside that house was thick with polish and performance. Every corner seemed rehearsed, like a scene waiting for applause. My daughter-in-law, whose name is Claire, led me through the wide foyer with a nervous smile. I noticed her fingers tightening around the edge of her sequined clutch, as if she feared I might embarrass her by simply breathing too loudly. I told her she looked lovely, and she murmured, almost apologetic, "Thank you, Judith," before rushing ahead. I was already an accessory in her world, not a guest. From the living room came the deep voice of her father, Richard Peterson, asking if the housekeeper had arrived. I froze for the briefest second. The question rolled so easily off his tongue that it felt rehearsed, as though he had been waiting to perform that insult. Claire whispered, "He means you, Mom," trying to turn the jab into a misunderstanding. I smiled, because sometimes silence is the most powerful boundary you can draw. They ushered me into a dining room large enough to echo. A chandelier glowed above a table set with heavy silver and crystal glasses that caught the light like tiny judgments. Mrs. Peterson, Elaine, was dressed in something satin, her hair styled into perfection that did not move when she nodded. She extended her hand to me the way one might offer a tip to someone cleaning their hotel room. I shook it firmly. Her eyes flickered in surprise, and that small moment became my quiet victory. Dinner began with polite questions that were really invitations to classify me. "So, Judith," Richard said, "what is it you do?" The smile on his face said he already had the answer. I kept my voice steady. "Oh, I stay busy," I replied. Elaine laughed, sharp and brittle. "Busy with cleaning jobs, I suppose? Claire mentioned you have a very hands-on approach to life." The table chuckled lightly. I joined them. But inside, a memory unfurled. Me on my knees, scrubbing the floor of my first apartment after David's father left, not out of shame, but out of determination. Work had never been beneath me. Disrespect, however, always would be. David arrived late, looking uncomfortable in his expensive jacket. He kissed his wife on the cheek, patted my shoulder, and avoided my eyes. That small avoidance hurt more than all the rest combined. A son can wound you without words. He sat down between Claire and her mother, an arrangement that made clear which world he wanted to belong to tonight. I watched him laugh at Richard's jokes, nod at Elaine's small boasts, and I thought about how people sometimes trade authenticity for approval and call it progress. The waiter brought the first course, and the conversation turned to vacations, stocks, and club memberships. Each sentence felt like an advertisement for status. When Elaine asked if I had ever been to the Caribbean, I said softly, "I once spent a week in San Juan for work." She blinked, confused. "Oh, you cleaned resorts there?" she asked. Her tone carried no cruelty, just the pure arrogance of assumption. I answered, "No, I was coordinating regional operations for a company that supplies those resorts." She didn't hear me. Or maybe she did and decided not to. That was the quiet abuse of the night, the kind that slips through politeness and lands directly on dignity. I sipped my water, letting their chatter fill the room while I thought about the difference between freedom and approval. They had wealth, but they were not free. Every gesture was an audition. Every laugh was measured. And sitting among them, in my simple blouse, I felt lighter than any of them ever could. When the main course arrived, Elaine began speaking about social responsibility. She said, "People like us must help the less fortunate find their place." Then she looked directly at me and smiled. That smile was a weapon dressed as kindness. I understood her message clearly. You are the lesson, we are the teachers. But I had not come to learn. I had come to observe the theater of arrogance in its purest form. At one point, Richard asked how I knew the Peterson family name. I told him I recognized it from a supplier list I once approved years ago. He waved a hand, uninterested, saying, "We deal with so many companies, you must be mistaken." I let him have his assumption. In time, the truth would return to him like a mirror. The evening stretched, long and gleaming, like a performance no one dared end. Beneath the laughter, I could feel the pulse of discomfort building. Not mine, theirs. They wanted validation, and I gave them nothing but calm eyes and good manners. They were playing a game of superiority, but I had changed the rules the moment I walked through that door. I glanced at David. His smile had grown tighter, his eyes darting between me and the Petersons. He could feel what I already knew, that the night was a test, and not the one he expected. Soon, the mask would start to crack. By the time dessert arrived, the Petersons had achieved what they seemed to love most, the sound of their own voices. The chandelier above glowed like a spotlight, turning the dinner table into their private stage. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, feeling like an uninvited spectator in a play called The Illusion of Class. Every word, every laugh, was a carefully measured display of self-importance. Elaine lifted her fork delicately, pretending interest as she asked, "Judith, what do you think of our home?" I told Claire we wanted something timeless, something that speaks of heritage. I looked around at the marble fireplace, the glass cabinets showing off trophies and certificates, and I said softly, "It certainly speaks." Her painted smile trembled for a second. "And what does it say?" she asked. "That depends," I replied, "on who is listening." For the first time that evening, silence touched the table. David cleared his throat and changed the subject, his voice tight. He talked about his new promotion, about how Claire's parents had helped open doors. He never once mentioned the woman who built the ground beneath those doors. I smiled, not in approval, but in acknowledgement of how far a mother's sacrifices can travel unseen. As coffee was served, Elaine leaned toward me with a look that blended pity and superiority. "It must be hard sometimes," she said, "living on so little. But you have such a strong spirit. People like you remind us how lucky we are." That sentence struck like a bell. People like you. I felt my spine straighten. I had worked decades to be the woman I am, yet to her, I was a charity project wrapped in skin. Claire shifted uncomfortably. "Mother," she whispered, but Elaine waved her off. "Oh, I mean it kindly. There's dignity in simplicity, isn't there?" she added. I took a slow sip of coffee. "There is," I said, "when simplicity is a choice, not an expectation." Richard chuckled and said, "You're quite philosophical for someone in your line of work." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. I watched the ripples reach David's face. He looked away, ashamed but silent. For years I had believed my son saw me clearly. That even if he misunderstood my silence, he respected its source. But tonight, sitting at that glossy table, I realized he had inherited their lens. To him, I was not poor, but he had allowed them to think I was, and that permission was its own betrayal. The conversation drifted to property values and private schools. I listened, thinking how the measure of success they praised was the same one that once made me doubt my worth. It took me most of my life to learn that you can earn respect without owning admiration, that dignity grows quietly in people who have faced hunger and fear and still choose kindness. When the plates were cleared, Elaine turned to me again. "You know, Judith," she said, "if you ever need a little help, we'd be happy to contribute something. We have a program through the foundation that supports hardworking women like you." Her tone was syrup, sweet but sticky. David froze mid-motion, his fork halfway to his mouth. I smiled. "That's generous," I said. "How much help are we talking about?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice like someone delivering a secret. "Perhaps $700 a month, just to give you some breathing room. Consider it our way of caring." There it was, The moment the mask fell, they were not offering kindness, they were buying distance. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a calm that made her blink. $700, I repeated softly. That's thoughtful. You must value peace very highly. Her laugh faltered. Excuse me? Peace, I said. The kind people buy when they don't want to face discomfort. Richard shifted in his chair. I think what Elaine means, he said, is that we understand how hard life can be for some people. It's not charity, it's compassion. I nodded, feeling the first flicker of heat in my chest. Not rage, but courage waking up. I had played their game long enough. Every word they spoke was another shovel of dirt, and I was done being buried by politeness. David's eyes met mine, wide, pleading. He mouthed, "Mom, please." But I was past the point of pretending. There are moments when dignity demands a voice, even if it trembles. Tonight, that voice would be mine. I placed my napkin on the table, smoothed it gently, and smiled. That's very kind of you, I said. But I think we should discuss value properly before anyone starts offering me lessons in compassion. And just like that, the air changed. I could feel the tremor of unease ripple through the room, the prelude to revelation. The moment I said those words, you could hear the silence stretch like glass. Claire's hand froze on her wine glass. Richard's jaw tightened as if he had bitten into something sour. Elaine adjusted her pearl bracelet, trying to restore the power she suddenly felt slipping away. David stared at me, his expression a mix of dread and disbelief, as if I had just walked barefoot into sacred territory. I smiled gently. You see, I began, value is a strange thing. People talk about it as though it lives in numbers, in marble floors, in the width of a driveway. But I've met janitors who carry more grace in their palms than some men do in their bank accounts. Elaine gave a soft, awkward laugh. Oh, I don't think we were talking about that kind of value, she said, her voice sweet but cold. I know, I answered, meeting her eyes. That's why it's worth discussing. Richard cleared his throat, perhaps hoping to change the tone. Well, Judith, I imagine you've seen plenty of both sides in your line of work. I have, I said. I've worked with people who have nothing and give everything, and others who have everything and still want more. Which side do you think sleeps better at night? The question lingered, gentle but heavy. Elaine didn't answer. Instead, she smiled that tight, brittle smile that wealthy people use when they've lost control of a conversation. David shifted in his seat. Mom, he said softly, maybe we should... I raised a hand to stop him, not unkindly. No, David. We should finish dinner. You wanted me to keep it simple. I'm just being myself. The waiter came in with coffee, but no one reached for it. I could feel the atmosphere tighten, a room full of people pretending everything was fine while truth sat between us, bright as a candle. I looked at Elaine and said, You were very generous to offer me money. I'm sure you didn't mean harm. But I wonder, what did you think I would do with it? She blinked. I only wanted to help, she said. I believe you, I replied. But help that comes from pity is rarely help at all. It's a quiet way of saying someone belongs beneath you. For a moment, her composure cracked. That's not what I meant. I know, I said softly, but that's what it feels like. Then I turned to David. Son, tell me something. Why did you tell them I clean houses? His face went pale. I didn't want them to treat you differently, he whispered. Then you don't know me at all, I said. Because I don't change for people's comfort. His shoulders slumped. He looked down at his plate, ashamed. And I felt the faint ache of motherhood. How love can break your heart and still make you protect the one who broke it. Richard finally spoke, his tone defensive. We're just trying to make everyone comfortable, Judith. This is how the world works. Appearances matter. Yes, I said. They do. But the problem starts when appearances become the truth people live by. That's how arrogance grows. The room fell silent again. I could see the cracks forming now, small but visible. Claire reached for David's hand under the table, her thumb brushing his knuckles as if asking whether she should intervene. But David stayed still, watching me with an expression I had not seen since he was a child. The look of someone realizing his mother was more than he ever gave her credit for. Elaine tried to recover her charm. "You certainly have strong opinions, Judith," she said. "But I suppose that's what comes from a lifetime of hard work." "Yes," I said quietly. "It does. Hard work builds not just calluses, but clarity." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. "Would you like to know what I do for a living, Elaine? What I've really done all these years?" Her eyes flickered, unsure whether to answer. "If you wish," she said. I smiled. "Not yet," I replied. "It's more fun to let assumptions ripen before picking them." Her husband frowned, confused, but Elaine gave a dismissive laugh. "Whatever makes you happy, dear," she said. I looked around the room, at the polished wood, the framed degrees, the family portraits smiling with perfect teeth, and I felt something shift inside me. I had come here thinking I would simply play a part, that I could hide behind modesty long enough to watch their arrogance bloom. But sitting there, surrounded by the sound of their careful breathing, I realized the act had become unnecessary. The truth had already begun to show itself. There was no need to raise my voice. Dignity does not shout. It waits. So I waited, watching the Petersons in their own house of mirrors, wondering how long it would take before the reflection turned on them. The night pressed on, polished and tense. The Petersons' home looked like something from a magazine, yet the longer I sat there, the hollower it felt, like beauty built on air. Richard leaned back in his chair, twirling his wine glass as if he were grading me on an invisible scale. Elaine's posture never bent. She held her spine like it was armor. Claire tried to keep the conversation alive, offering small smiles that wilted before they reached her eyes. David looked trapped between two worlds, and for the first time, I didn't feel pity for him. I felt distance. Elaine broke the silence first. "You know, Judith," she said, her tone dripping with diplomacy, "we weren't trying to offend you earlier. We simply assumed your situation might be challenging. I hope you don't take it personally." I smiled faintly. I stopped taking other people's assumptions personally a long time ago. Richard chuckled. "A healthy attitude. The world is cruel to those without means. You must have learned to adapt." "Yes," I said evenly, "and also to recognize cruelty when it hides behind a polite smile." That landed harder than I expected. Richard's smirk faltered. Elaine's eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed with something close to irritation. "I think," she said stiffly, "you're reading too much into things. We were simply trying to help." "Help," I repeated softly, "isn't something you give to feel good about yourself. It's something you offer because you see the other person's dignity, not their need." Claire looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing the person behind the disguise for the first time. "Judith," she said quietly, "you remind me of my grandmother. She used to say the same thing, that pity is just another form of pride." I nodded. "Your grandmother was a wise woman." The conversation teetered on the edge of civility. Elaine forced another smile. "I think what we all need tonight is grace," she said. "Don't you agree?" "Yes," I answered. "Grace and truth. One without the other is hypocrisy dressed up for dinner." Richard set his glass down. "You speak like a teacher," he said. "What exactly did you do before retirement?" I met his gaze. "I haven't retired." His eyebrows lifted. "Really? Still cleaning?" "Yes," I said. "Just not the kind of cleaning you're thinking of." A pulse of confusion spread across the table. I could almost hear it, tiny fractures forming beneath the surface of their confidence. Elaine laughed too quickly, her voice sharp. "Well, I'm sure whatever it is keeps you busy." "It does," I replied. "It keeps me accountable. To people, to numbers, to standards." I let the words hang, carefully placed but unclaimed. Watching their faces twist slightly as they tried to fit me back into the box they had built was like watching a mirror fog over. Then David spoke. His voice was small but trembled with something real. "Mom," he said, "maybe we should tell them what you do." Elaine's head snapped toward him. "David, There's no need to embarrass your mother." He hesitated. "Embarrass?" he repeated softly. "That's what you think this is?" For a brief second, pride flared in me. My son was starting to wake up. But before he could speak again, I placed a hand on his arm. "No," I said gently. "Let me handle it." I turned to Elaine and Richard, my tone calm and almost kind. "Do you know why I agreed to come tonight?" Richard shrugged. "To meet your daughter-in-law's family, I assume. That, and to understand what kind of love my son has married into. You see, love reveals itself most clearly in the way we treat those we believe are beneath us." Elaine bristled. "How dare you insinuate?" "I'm not insinuating," I said, still calm. "I'm observing." Her lips tightened, and for a moment I thought she might tell me to leave. But curiosity held her there. People like Elaine rarely walk away from a stage, even when the spotlight burns. I leaned back and took a slow breath. I've been called many things in my life: poor, single, stubborn. Some were true at the time. None defined me. But tonight, you've reminded me why I chose to live modestly, even when I could afford much more. Because humility exposes arrogance like light exposes dust. David exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath all night. Claire looked down, her eyes glistening. Elaine's confidence flickered, and for the first time, she didn't have a clever reply. I rose from my chair. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. "You've given me exactly what I came for." Elaine frowned. "And what's that?" "The truth," I said. "The truth about who we all are when we think no one important is watching." I sat back down slowly. The sound of the clock in the hallway filled the silence that followed. Each tick felt like a countdown to the moment I would stop pretending. The night had turned colder, but the tension in that dining room was heat enough for all of us. The Petersons sat like actors who had forgotten their lines, each waiting for someone else to break the silence. Even the chandelier seemed to hum with discomfort. I looked at the table. Half-empty glasses, untouched dessert, folded napkins that looked like surrender, and thought, this is what arrogance looks like when it loses its audience. Elaine spoke first, her voice brittle. "I think you've misunderstood us, Judith. We only wanted to make you feel included." "Included," I repeated softly. "By hiding who I am?" She shifted in her chair. "No, of course not. It's just, people can be judgmental. We didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable." "And yet," I said, "here we are." Richard sighed heavily, trying to reclaim authority. "Let's not dramatize this. We were simply being practical." "Practical," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me, Richard, how practical is it to measure a person's worth by what they own? How practical is it to humiliate a guest in your home?" His jaw tightened. "You're being unfair." I smiled faintly. "And you're being honest for the first time tonight." David's hand found his forehead. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "This is getting out of hand." "No, David," I said gently. "It's getting into truth. There's a difference." Claire looked between us, her face pale, eyes glistening. She said softly, "I think Judith's right." Elaine turned sharply toward her. "Claire," but the young woman didn't stop. "You've both been cruel tonight. You might not see it, but you have. And I let it happen." The admission hung in the air like a small earthquake. David looked at her, stunned. Elaine flushed red. "You're overreacting," she said. "No," Claire replied. "I'm just finally seeing it." I placed a hand over hers. "Thank you," I whispered. "That takes courage." Elaine stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I've never been insulted in my own home." "Maybe that's the problem," I said quietly. "You've lived too long surrounded by people who only tell you what you want to hear." Richard pushed his chair back. "That's enough." His tone was low, dangerous in its restraint. "You may have your opinions, but this is our home, and we won't tolerate—" "Truth?" I interrupted. "You won't tolerate truth?" He glared at me. "You've had a chip on your shoulder since you walked in." "No," I said. "I had a plan. A quiet one. To see who you really were when faced with someone you thought was beneath you." The air thickened. Even the ticking clock seemed louder. David looked like a man watching his whole illusion crumble. "Mom, why would you even agree to this?" "Because," I said softly, "I needed to know what kind of people my son was building his life with, and now I do." Elaine scoffed. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You act as if we've committed a crime." "Not a crime," I said. "Just a choice. You chose arrogance over kindness. You chose perception over respect. And tonight, you've shown me exactly what happens when pride sits where love should be." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Claire whispered, "She's right." Elaine looked at her daughter like she'd been betrayed. "You have no idea what you're saying." "Oh, I do," Claire said, voice shaking but steady. "You raised me to think status mattered more than character. But Judith's been more gracious tonight than we have in years." I saw tears beginning to form at the corners of Elaine's eyes. They weren't tears of remorse, not yet, just confusion at being seen so clearly. Richard muttered something under his breath about ungrateful guests, but I didn't listen. I was looking at my son. His eyes were red, his posture small. "Mom," he said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted everyone to get along." "Getting along is easy when people pretend," I said softly. "Respect is harder. It requires truth. It requires boundaries." He nodded slowly, shame crossing his face like a shadow. "You're right." The moment cracked something in me, an old ache that had lived there for years, the ache of being the quiet one, the dependable one, the woman who holds everyone together even while breaking inside. I realized then that tonight wasn't just about the Petersons. It was about me reclaiming my own reflection. "I think we've had enough for one evening," I said finally, standing up. "I'll take a cab home." "Don't be absurd," Elaine said quickly. "David can drive you." I looked at her and smiled. "Thank you, but I'll manage. I've been managing all my life." I reached for my coat and felt an unexpected peace wash over me. There was still more to reveal, more to say, but not yet. The real reckoning would come soon enough. Tonight I had simply cracked the shell. As I stepped toward the door, I turned back once more. "Elaine," I said softly, "don't worry. You'll understand me better before the night is over." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You'll see," I said, and walked out into the cool night air. I waited outside their mansion while the night pressed cool against my skin. The air smelled of trimmed grass and wealth, sterile and quiet, the kind of quiet that hides tension instead of peace. David came rushing after me, his voice soft, almost boyish again. "Mom, please wait. Don't go like this." I turned to him slowly. "How else should I go, David? Crawling?" His shoulders sagged. "I didn't mean for it to turn out like this." "You never do," I said. "That's how silent betrayal works. It happens while you're trying not to notice." He flinched, and for a moment, the confident man he pretended to be at that table vanished. I saw my son, the little boy who once brought me daisies from a parking lot because he said the world needed more yellow. I had raised him to see beauty in the overlooked, and somewhere along the way, he learned to overlook it himself. "Mom," he said again, voice cracking, "they didn't mean to humiliate you. My in-laws they're used to a certain way of life." "I know," I said. "And you wanted to fit into that way of life, didn't you?" He looked down, ashamed. "Yes." I nodded. "Then you succeeded. You fit perfectly tonight." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." I took a slow breath. Sorry is the start, not the solution. What matters is what you do after you've said it. The front door opened behind us. Elaine's silhouette appeared, framed by the golden light from the hallway. "David," she called sharply, "don't stand out there all night. Bring her back in. We need to settle the bill." "The bill?" I asked. David rubbed his neck. "They insisted on handling it. The restaurant said they'd add it to their house account." I raised an eyebrow. "A house account?" He nodded, embarrassed. "It's a private dining partnership they have. They never carry cards." Elaine's tone turned brittle. "Please come inside. We're wrapping things up." I looked at my son and said, "This should be interesting." Inside, The energy had shifted. The waiter stood awkwardly near the table, holding a leather folder. Elaine looked uncomfortable for the first time that evening. "There seems to be some confusion," she said to Richard, who was rifling through his wallet. Richard muttered under his breath, "It must be a system error." He handed over another card. Declined. Then another. Also declined. The waiter's polite smile began to tremble at the edges. "I'm sure it's nothing," Elaine said, her tone too high, too fast. "Run it again." The waiter did. Declined again. David's eyes darted between them, disbelief spreading like a blush. Claire whispered, "Dad?" Richard's voice cracked with irritation. "Call the bank. Tell them to fix this nonsense." Elaine forced a laugh. "Technology these days," she said weakly. But her hands were shaking. The confidence, the superiority, the thin film of power. They were all peeling away in front of me. The waiter turned to me, hesitant. "Would you like to settle the bill, ma'am?" Elaine's head snapped toward him. "No, she's a guest. We'll handle it." I smiled, calm and deliberate. "Actually, I insist." I reached into my small purse, pulled out a black Centurion card, and laid it on the table with care. The Petersons froze. The waiter's eyes widened. He knew what kind of card it was, the kind that doesn't belong to someone struggling to survive. Richard blinked. "Where did you get that?" "I earned it," I said simply. The waiter took the card, processed it, and returned moments later. "Approved," he said quietly. He handed me the receipt with a small bow of respect. Elaine's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't understand." I looked at her kindly. "I know you don't." Richard leaned forward. "Who exactly are you, Judith?" I smiled. "Someone you underestimated." David sat motionless, his hand covering his mouth. Claire whispered, "Judith, what do you do?" I met her eyes. "I manage operations for 5 countries. I oversee teams, budgets, and decisions that affect more people than this dinner table could hold." Elaine's hand trembled as she set down her glass. "You let us believe—" "I let you reveal yourselves," I said. "There's a difference." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The Petersons' arrogance, once sharp and commanding, now lay in pieces across the table like broken glass. I looked at David, who could not lift his gaze. "You wanted me to act small," I said softly. "Now you see what smallness really looks like." And with that, I stood up and walked to the door, leaving the Centurion receipt signed neatly with my full name, Judith Reynolds. When I stepped back into the night, the air felt lighter, as if the truth itself had cracked open the evening sky. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled confusion of voices inside the Peterson home, Elaine's disbelief, Richard's denial, Claire's stunned silence, and David's voice, small and trembling, asking me to wait. I didn't. Some moments deserve silence more than explanation. I walked toward the gate at the end of the long, manicured driveway. The moon was bright enough to cast my shadow along the path, and for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. That shadow didn't belong to someone pretending anymore. It belonged to a woman who had reclaimed her place in her own story. When I reached the curb, a car pulled up beside me. It was Claire. She rolled down the window, eyes glistening with tears. "Judith," she said softly, "please don't leave like this." I leaned toward the window. "You don't owe me an apology," I told her, "but I think you owe yourself one." She hesitated. "I didn't know how they would treat you. I should have said something." "Yes," I said, "you should have. But now you know what silence costs." Claire nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I've been trying to please them my whole life," she said. "I didn't realize how much of myself I've lost in the process." "Then tonight is your beginning," I said. "Don't waste it." She reached for my hand through the window. "How can you be so calm?" "Because calm isn't weakness," I answered. "It's control. And I've spent too many years letting others define mine." A light came on in the house behind her. Elaine stood at the doorway, staring at us, her figure sharp against the glow. She didn't call out. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she finally realized that there's no wealth great enough to buy back dignity once it's spent. Claire whispered. She's never been told the truth to her face before. Then let this be her education, I said. Real kindness doesn't cushion arrogance, it exposes it. I thanked Claire for coming, squeezed her hand gently, and told her to go back before the chill got worse. She nodded, hesitated once more, then said, David wants to see you tomorrow. He's shaken. He should be, I said. But tell him this, I still love him. I just don't owe him blindness anymore. She covered her mouth, fighting emotion. You're remarkable, Judith. I smiled. No, I'm just awake. The car drove off slowly, the red tail lights shrinking until the street swallowed them. I stood there a while longer, watching the mansion disappear into stillness. I thought about every mother who's been told to shrink herself for the comfort of others. Every woman who's been treated like a servant in the story she built with her own hands. The world often mistakes humility for inferiority. But tonight I had proven, at least to myself, that the two could not be more different. When I finally got home, the house greeted me with its small, comforting quiet. I hung my coat, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table. The old clock ticked above the stove, steady and patient. I thought of my mother, who used to say, "The world will test your grace until you decide what's worth defending." I whispered, "I've decided, Mama." I looked around the modest room that held decades of my life, the same home where I had built my strength in silence. Nothing about it sparkled, and that was precisely why I loved it. No pretense, no illusions, just truth in every corner. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the one who walked into the Petersons' house earlier that evening. She was older, yes, but taller somehow. Freer. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it. You finally stopped apologizing for your worth." The next morning would bring new consequences. There would be phone calls, explanations, maybe even apologies. But for tonight, I allowed myself to rest in the quiet certainty that I had drawn a line no one could cross again. Because sometimes, dignity isn't about how others see you. It's about what you refuse to unsee in yourself. The morning light came in pale and kind through the kitchen window. I sat with a cup of black coffee, staring at the steam as if it were a map of everything that had changed overnight. My phone buzzed again and again. I didn't answer. I already knew who it was. David had texted 3 times before sunrise, and each message read more desperate than the last. The 4th one simply said, "Please, I need to see you." I thought about ignoring it. I thought about protecting my peace. But motherhood isn't something you clock out of, even when your child's choices have cut you to the bone. So I texted back one word, "Come." He arrived an hour later, standing in the doorway like a boy who had lost his way home. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt. No designer jacket, no polished charm, just raw remorse in a face that finally looked human again. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" "You're already here," I replied. He stepped inside, looking around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. "It's smaller than I remember," he murmured. "No," I said. "You just grew blind to the size of things that mattered." He nodded, shame heavy in his voice. "I know." I poured him coffee, the way I always had since he was a teenager cramming for exams. He sat at the table, hands trembling slightly. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "Start where the truth begins," I said, "with why you were ashamed." He stared into the mug. "I wanted Claire's family to respect me. They care so much about appearances, about wealth, and I thought if I fit into their world, everything would be easier. I thought you'd understand." "I do," I said softly. "I understand too well. I spent years trying to earn respect in rooms that were never built for me, but I never gave up my name to do it." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to disrespect you." "Intentions are not immunity," I replied. "The harm still lands where it lands." His eyes filled with tears. "When you walked in last night, I felt proud for a second, and then terrified. because I realized how much I had lied to everyone, including myself. I told them you cleaned houses to make you seem harmless. But you were the only person in that room who actually had nothing to prove. I said nothing. I just let him sit in the silence of that realization. Sometimes silence is the best teacher a mother can give. After a long pause, he said, "They're humiliated. My in-laws. They don't know what to say." "Good," I said. "Maybe humiliation will teach them what empathy could not." He gave a weak laugh, shaking his head. "Claire's been crying. She feels terrible." "She saw the truth," I said, "and she's learning. Don't punish her for waking up before you did." He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Can you forgive me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't a switch, David. It's a boundary. I will forgive you when you stop repeating what broke me." He nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "You're not angry." I smiled faintly. "You're wrong. I am angry. But I've learned that anger can either burn bridges or light the way forward. I'm choosing the light." His shoulders dropped, relief mixing with grief. "You're stronger than all of us." "No," I said. "I just stopped needing permission to be myself." He sat quietly, staring at the sunlight crawling across the table. "Mom," he said after a moment, "what do you want me to do now?" "Learn," I said simply. "Learn the value of what can't be bought. Learn that kindness has no price tag. And most of all, learn to protect the dignity of the people who love you, even when no one else is watching." He nodded, tears finally falling. I reached out and covered his hand with mine. "You're still my son," I said softly. "But from now on, you meet me eye to eye. No more pretending you stand above me. You never did." Outside, the sound of birds filled the morning. Inside, something quieter, reconciliation, fragile but real, began to take root. He whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled. Mothers don't give up, David. They just stop carrying what isn't theirs. By afternoon, the sun had climbed high and poured through my front windows, warm and unforgiving, as if it wanted to keep everyone honest. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it. Peace is fragile after a storm, and I wasn't ready for another intrusion. But something told me to open the door anyway. It was Claire. No makeup, no polished dress, just jeans, a cardigan, and a face stripped of performance. She looked younger that way and more real. "Judith," she said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Of course, you already know the way." She glanced around the living room, her eyes falling on the framed photographs, David's graduation, our old dog sleeping in the sun, my mother holding me as a baby. It was a small house, but every inch of it carried truth. She took a seat at the kitchen table where David and I had sat that morning. "I haven't slept," she said. "Last night keeps playing in my head. I can't believe how blind I've been." "You grew up in a world where blindness was taught as grace," I said gently. "You were trained to mistake politeness for kindness." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I used to think my parents' way was the right way, to keep up appearances, to control how people saw us. But when you spoke last night, I realized I've never once spoken freely in that house. I've been living under someone else's idea of worth. That realization," I said softly, "is the start of freedom. But freedom comes with consequences. Once you see clearly, you can't pretend anymore." She pressed a tissue to her cheek, shaking her head. "I'm ashamed." "Good," I said. "Shame means your conscience still works. But don't live there too long. Use it. Change from it." Claire looked at me with something like admiration. "How do you stay so composed? Even when they tried to humiliate you, you didn't lose your calm." "I've spent a lifetime learning that anger can't always serve justice," I said. "Sometimes, restraint does. Dignity isn't loud, it's steady. And steady women terrify people who build their power on noise." She gave a soft, broken laugh. "You terrified my mother last night." "I didn't mean to," I said. "But if fear is what opens her eyes, so be it." Claire reached across the table. I want to be different. I want to raise my children, when I have them, to know that respect is earned by decency, not by wealth. I smiled. Then you've already started rewriting the story. She hesitated, then said, My parents are still in shock. My father hasn't spoken all morning. My mother keeps pacing the kitchen saying she's been tricked. Truth feels like trickery to those who worship illusion, I said. Give them time, their pride is bleeding. Claire nodded slowly. I told them they owe you an apology. I looked at her kindly. Apologies mean nothing unless behavior changes. I don't need them to kneel. I just need them to grow. She exhaled deeply. You're incredible, Judith. No, I said. I'm ordinary. I just stopped apologizing for my own reflection. She studied me for a moment, and then her face softened. I wish I'd met you years ago. You could have saved me from so much pretending. You weren't ready to stop pretending, I said. No one changes until pretending starts to hurt. Claire smiled faintly, her eyes red. David told me what you said to him this morning, that forgiveness is a boundary. That hit me hard. It's true, I said. Forgiveness without boundaries is surrender. Love without limits is exhaustion. She nodded, as if storing the words carefully in her mind. Then she said quietly, My parents want to invite you to dinner again. A real one. No masks this time. I laughed softly. They'll need more than a dinner to rebuild respect. I know, she said, smiling shyly, but maybe it's a start. I stood and walked her to the door. The light from outside touched her face, and for the first time, she looked free. Not because she had escaped her parents' world, but because she had stopped believing she needed their permission to breathe. Before she left, she turned to me and said, You changed something in that house last night. You changed me. I shook my head. I didn't change you, Claire. I just gave you a mirror. The rest was yours to see. She hugged me then, tight, honest, unperformed. And as I watched her walk down the steps, I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge against cruelty is transformation. To stand taller without needing to make anyone smaller. To live so truthfully that falsehood has nowhere left to hide. That evening, the world outside felt unusually calm. The sky was streaked with amber and violet, a slow dissolve from daylight into forgiveness. I sat on the porch with a wool blanket across my knees and a notebook in my lap. I had not written in years, but something about the stillness invited reflection. My handwriting came shaky at first, then steadier with each word. I wrote about limits, about what it means to protect your dignity without building a wall around your heart. Halfway through the page, headlights swept across my yard. A silver sedan stopped by the curb. I knew before the door even opened who it was. Elaine stepped out, wearing a coat far too elegant for the quiet street. But the woman walking toward me was not the one I had met at that dinner table. Her steps were hesitant, almost unsure. Judith, she said softly. I hope I'm not intruding. That depends, I replied, on whether you came to argue or to listen. She hesitated, then sat down in the empty chair beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cicadas filled the silence, their hum blending with the faint sound of traffic from downtown. Elaine clasped her gloved hands together. I didn't sleep last night, she said. I kept replaying what happened. I suppose I wanted to see you. To understand. I nodded slowly. Understanding usually arrives late, but at least it arrives. She took a deep breath. I've been proud of many things in my life. Our house, our business, our reputation. But last night, sitting there after you left, I realized I've been proud of all the wrong things. That's a hard mirror to face, I said. Elaine's voice trembled. When I saw that card, the one you used to pay the bill, I felt humiliated. And then I realized how easily I had humiliated you. I told myself I was generous. I told myself I was kind. But kindness without respect is nothing but decoration. I watched her carefully. People like us, women who grew up believing our worth depended on how others saw us, we learned to perform compassion. But real compassion costs something. It asks us to step down from the pedestal. She looked at me, eyes wet. I don't know how to fix what I did. You start by not pretending it didn't happen, I said. Then you raise your daughter to live differently. Elaine nodded. Claire has already told me as much. She said you showed her what strength looks like when it's quiet. A long pause followed. The evening air smelled of pine and faint rain. Then Elaine reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. This isn't money, she said quickly, seeing my expression. It's a letter. I wrote it this morning. It's not an excuse. It's an acknowledgement of what you taught me. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Thank you, I said simply. Letters mean more when they aren't written to erase guilt. She nodded. It's not guilt, Judith. It's gratitude. You reminded me who I was before I learned to look down on people. We sat there quietly, two women from different worlds, but maybe not so different after all. The air between us no longer felt heavy. Before she left, Elaine stood and said, You must think I'm a terrible woman. No, I said. I think you're a woman who forgot herself. And now you're remembering. She wiped a tear and managed a small smile. You're gracious beyond what I deserve. Graciousness isn't about what people deserve, I said. It's about who we choose to be after we've been wronged. She nodded, whispered a thank you, and walked back to her car. The taillights disappeared down the street, and I sat for a while longer, listening to the soft night settle over everything. I opened her letter under the porch light. The handwriting was neat but shaky. It read, Thank you for showing me that dignity can look like silence, that humility can have power, and that I was never rich until I learned respect. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my notebook. The night had turned cool, but the world suddenly felt warmer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The days that followed moved with a strange, quiet rhythm. There were no apologies posted on social media, no grand gestures, no drama. Just silence, the kind that allows people to process who they've been and who they might still become. David came by every evening for a week, sometimes with Claire, sometimes alone. We didn't always talk about what had happened. Sometimes he just helped me tend the garden, pulling weeds in silence, handing me tools, as if each small act were a wordless confession. I didn't rush him. Real remorse needs room to breathe. One evening, as we planted autumn chrysanthemums, he said softly, Mom, I told my team at work about what happened, about how I let my pride run me. I smiled. That must have taken courage. It did, he admitted. But they respected me for it, said they wished they had a mother like you. I patted his shoulder. Then start being the kind of man who deserves one. He laughed, but there was sincerity behind it. I'm trying. Later that week, Claire came alone. She carried a tray of food, nervous but determined. I wanted to cook for you, she said. I'd like that, I answered. We ate in the kitchen. Simple pasta, a salad, and apple pie that tasted like effort, not perfection. Somewhere in the middle of that meal, she said, My mother keeps rereading the letter she gave you. She says it feels like a mirror she can't stop looking into. That's a good thing, I said. Mirrors aren't meant to be comfortable. They're meant to be honest. Claire nodded slowly. She asked if she could see you again. I'll think about it, I said. Not because I hold a grudge, but because forgiveness needs to grow roots before it can flower. We both smiled at that. When she left, I watched her car drive away and thought about how cycles break. Not with shouting, not with punishment, but with the quiet insistence on truth. That's what this had been about all along. Not revenge, not exposure, just truth. The following Sunday, I received a small card in the mail. No signature, no return address. Just 7 words written in delicate handwriting. Thank you for making us see ourselves. I recognized Elaine's script, but I didn't need the confirmation. That one sentence was more valuable than all her wealth. That evening, I walked through my neighborhood as the sun dipped behind the trees. I passed the same people I always did. The retired teacher watering her flowers, the young couple arguing gently about grocery lists, the boy on his skateboard chasing light down the street. No one knew about the dinner that had unmasked a family. No one knew how far that night had stretched inside me. But I did. I felt lighter. Like a burden had finally been set down after being carried for decades. The weight of being the quiet one, the reliable one, the woman who never demands. That weight was gone. When I returned home, I lit a candle on the kitchen table and whispered a prayer, not for vengeance or vindication, but for clarity. I prayed that my son would live with respect as his compass, that Claire would keep choosing truth over comfort, and that Elaine would find her way back to humility. Then I prayed for myself, for the strength to keep my dignity without building walls, and for the peace to know that I had finally, fully, placed an end to the silent abuse that had hidden under courtesy. The flame flickered, and I felt something deep in my chest loosen, a knot years in the making. That night, as I slipped into bed, I realized that the story wasn't about wealth or poverty. It was about freedom, the kind that comes when you no longer need to prove who you are. Respect is not given by those who think they own it. It is claimed quietly by those who refuse to lose it. And for the first time in my 70 years, I slept without apology. Autumn arrived in full color. Crimson leaves scattered over the sidewalks, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke and distant rain. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. But I noticed the world around me differently now. When you reclaim your dignity, even ordinary mornings feel like victories. One afternoon, I stopped by a small cafe I liked downtown, the kind of place where people linger over books instead of phones. I ordered a cappuccino, found a table by the window, and pulled out my notebook. I had started writing again. Letters to myself, not to anyone else. Letters of forgiveness, of remembrance, of strength. Each word felt like a brick laid back into the foundation of the woman I had always been, but had once doubted. Halfway through my coffee, I heard a familiar voice. "Judith?" I looked up. It was Richard Peterson. He was dressed simply this time, no tailored suit, no air of command. Just a man holding his hat in both hands, unsure what to do with them. "Richard," I said, surprised but composed. "What brings you here?" He cleared his throat. "May I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair. "Go ahead." He sat stiffly, the way men do when they're used to owning rooms and suddenly realize they don't. "I wanted to thank you," he began. "Not for the dinner. God knows that was a disaster, but for what came after." I tilted my head. "You're welcome. Though I don't recall doing you a favor." He smiled faintly. "You did. You forced me to look at the kind of man I've become." I didn't like what I saw. There was sincerity in his tone, but also discomfort, the rawness of a man unpracticed in humility. "I built my life on winning," he said. "Every decision, every handshake, every deal. I thought success meant being the biggest voice in the room. But last week I realized I've spent years speaking louder just to avoid listening." "That's a common mistake," I said. "Power makes people forget their own echoes." He nodded slowly. "Elaine's been quieter lately, more thoughtful. She said you told her that grace without truth is hypocrisy. She's been repeating that like a prayer." I smiled. "It's a good one to keep." Richard hesitated. "I can't change who I was overnight, but I want to start by saying I'm sorry for the way we treated you, for the things we said and didn't say." I studied his face. The pride was still there, but softened. "I accept your apology," I said. "But don't say it for my forgiveness. Say it for your own growth." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I will." We sat quietly after that, the hum of the cafe filling the space between us. He looked out the window at the people passing by, ordinary lives, simple joys, and said, "I used to look at people like that and wonder how they could live with so little. Now I wonder how I lived with so much and still felt empty." I said nothing. Some revelations don't need witnesses, only space. Finally, he stood. "Elaine and I would like to invite you for Sunday dinner. No formalities, just family." I smiled softly. "I'll think about it, but thank you." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "For what it's worth, David's lucky to have you. Claire, too. You've changed them." "I didn't change them," I said. "They changed when truth became louder than comfort." He smiled at that, put on his hat, and left. As I watched him cross the street, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not revenge, not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes when justice has been served not by punishment, but by reflection. I finished my coffee, packed my notebook, and looked out the window again. The city moved steadily, indifferent to my small revolution. But inside me, something had shifted forever. I no longer needed to prove the worth of my silence. It spoke for itself. Sunday came quietly, wrapped in that kind of stillness only early mornings know. I woke before sunrise, made myself tea, and stood by the window watching the light crawl across the neighborhood. It was the first Sunday in a long time that didn't carry a weight of expectation. For once, I didn't have to perform for anyone, not for family, not for society, not even for forgiveness. Around 9, the phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice was gentle but nervous. "Judith, we're having a small gathering today. My parents want to see you again. There's no pressure, but they'd really like the chance to thank you properly." I hesitated. The idea of stepping back into that house, the same one that had witnessed my humiliation, made my stomach tighten. But then I remembered what dignity truly meant. To stand tall even where you were once made small. "All right," I said finally. "I'll come." When I arrived that afternoon, the house looked different. The polished perfection was still there, the trimmed hedges, the gleaming porch, but something softer lingered in the air. Elaine opened the door herself this time. No maid, no formality, just a woman who looked like she had been practicing humility. "Judith," she said, her voice steady but humble. "I'm glad you came." "Thank you for asking me," I said. She led me to the dining room, and I froze for a second. The table was set simply. No gold-rimmed china, no crystal, just plain white plates and a vase of autumn flowers. The air felt lighter, human. Richard stood as I entered. "Judith," he said, "thank you for being here." He gestured to the chair at the head of the table. "Please, sit." "I'm fine anywhere," I said with a small smile. "Then sit there," he replied. "You've earned it." I took the seat, and for the first time, I wasn't the outsider in that room. The meal was quiet at first, filled with small talk about weather and work. But halfway through, Elaine looked at me and said, "I read your letter again last night." "Your own letter?" I asked. She nodded. "And I realized something. I wrote it to you, but it was really meant for myself. You were just the mirror." "That's what truth does," I said. "It reflects what we hide." She smiled faintly. "I don't want to hide anymore." Claire reached across the table, squeezing her mother's hand. "We're all learning," she said. "And it's because of you, Judith." I looked around at them. Richard quieter, Elaine softened, David watching me with pride instead of embarrassment. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel there again. Peace. "I didn't come here for thanks," I said gently. "I came because you wanted to see me, and I wanted to know if respect could grow in this soil. I think it can." Elaine's eyes shimmered. "It will. You have my word." The meal went on, unpretentious and warm. We spoke about travel, books, and recipes instead of status and money. Laughter replaced tension. At one point, Richard asked for my opinion on a local charity project he was funding. "You'd be good at this," he said. "Your sense of fairness? It's what we need." I chuckled. "Careful," I said. "You might end up working for me someday." He laughed too, but not defensively. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad. As the sun began to dip, Claire brought coffee to the porch, and we all sat outside. The Peterson estate looked less intimidating now, like a house finally allowed to breathe. David leaned toward me. "You were right, Mom," he said softly. "Money doesn't make people powerful. Truth does." I smiled. "Truth and boundaries," I said. "Never forget both." Elaine turned to me. "I'd like to invite you again, not out of obligation, out of friendship." "Then I'll accept," I said, "because friendship is built on choice, not guilt." She nodded, her eyes glistening again. When it was time to leave, Claire hugged me first, then Elaine, then even Richard. Each embrace felt genuine, like an old wound quietly stitching itself closed. As I walked down their front path toward my car, I looked back at the house bathed in orange light. It no longer felt like a monument to arrogance. It felt like a place where lessons had been learned the hard way. And as I drove home, I realized that life's greatest retribution isn't revenge or shame. It's the days grew shorter after that Sunday, and the chill of November settled into Virginia. I could feel the season folding in, closing the year gently, like a mother pulling a blanket over a restless child. Life, once again, was simple. Coffee in the morning, evening walks, the soft rhythm of solitude. Yet something inside me had shifted forever. One Thursday evening, I came home to find a package on my porch. There was no return address, only a cream envelope attached to the top. Inside was a handwritten note, "From our family to yours, with gratitude for what you taught us." It was signed by all four of them, Elaine, Richard, Claire, and David. I opened the box carefully. Inside was a framed photo taken at the second dinner, one Claire must have arranged without me noticing. We were all there, smiling, genuine this time. Not the smile of performance, but of peace. Beneath the photo, engraved on a small brass plate, were the words, "True worth is never measured in wealth." I sat on the couch, holding it in my hands, and tears came quietly, not from pain, but from relief. For so many years, I had fought invisible battles, against pride, against disrespect, against the quiet erosion of self-worth. I had learned to survive without applause. But now, for the first time, I felt seen. That weekend, I invited them all to my home. No grand meal, no decorations. Just soup simmering on the stove and fresh bread cooling on the counter. When they arrived, I greeted them not as adversaries, but as people in progress. Elaine hugged me first, a real embrace. Richard shook my hand firmly, no hesitation. Claire handed me a small bouquet of daisies, yellow, like the ones David used to pick for me when he was little. "Home suits you," Elaine said, looking around the modest room with an appreciation she hadn't possessed before. "It always has," I said. "I just needed others to see what I saw." We sat together around the kitchen table. David helped me serve the soup. Laughter came easily, unforced. The Petersons spoke about volunteering, about simplifying their lives. Claire told me she'd convinced her parents to start a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to college. "We named it after my grandmother," she said, smiling. "She would have liked you." I felt a warmth rise in my chest. "Then she would have liked herself too," I said. As the evening wound down, David stayed behind to help with dishes. He turned to me and said quietly, "Mom, I think I finally understand what you meant about respect being a boundary. It's not about what you demand. It's about what you no longer allow." I smiled. "Exactly." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "I didn't do this for you," I said softly. "I did it for me. But I'm glad you came along." When they left, I stepped outside for a moment. The air was cold but clean, filled with the scent of pine. I looked up at the night sky, stars scattered like confessions, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, to the universe, to the quiet strength inside me, to the lesson itself. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about humiliation or revenge. It was about revelation, about a woman who refused to shrink herself for the comfort of others and, in doing so, taught them to grow. Dignity had not been restored that night in their mansion. It had never left me. It had only been waiting for me to speak it out loud. I walked back into my warm little house, turned off the lights, and smiled at the photograph on the mantel. The faces in it were changed, softened, honest. I whispered, "We made it." And for the first time in decades, I felt not just respected, but free. There are stories that end with forgiveness and others that end with understanding. This one ends with both. Judith Reynolds, a 70-year-old woman who had spent her life quietly carrying everyone else's expectations, finally carried only her own truth. What began as a painful dinner of arrogance became a revelation of worth, a lesson written in the language of dignity, justice, and the courage to place an end where one is needed. In the months that followed, life returned to its gentle pace. Judith kept her job, her home, and her modest habits. But something subtle changed inside her. She no longer avoided her reflection. She no longer softened her edges to make others comfortable. The world had not suddenly become kind, but she had become unshakable. David learned to measure love by respect, not pride. He began calling his mother just to talk, not to ask for anything. Claire, once defined by her parents' approval, grew into a woman of conviction, unafraid to confront injustice at her own table. And the Petersons, those polished pillars of perfection, learned that humility is not weakness, but wisdom, disguised as grace. Judith's story reminds us that silent abuse often wears polite faces, that ungrateful children are not born but shaped by the values they inherit, and that a mother's quiet strength can dismantle generations of entitlement. She taught them all that money can buy comfort, but never character, and that true freedom comes not from status, but from self-respect. On a winter evening months later, Judith sat by her window watching the first snow fall across Arlington. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends, co-workers, her son, and she smiled. There was peace in her solitude, the kind that grows only after you've survived misunderstanding without losing tenderness. She whispered to herself, "I am enough," and the room seemed to breathe those words back to her. That is the power of dignity reclaimed. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It stands quietly, unshaken, waiting for the world to rise to its height. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.